They say history is written by the victors. But what about the stories that fall between the cracks? The moments of humanity that existed in the spaces where hatred should have thrived. In 1879, the American government had decided the fate of entire nations. The Apache were being hunted, starved, and forced from their ancestral lands. Meanwhile, a newly freed black man had carved out a fragile existence where no one thought he could survive. Please, sir, our people are dying. When these worlds collided, something happened that no history book recorded. A choice that would change the course of many lives. What you're about to witness is the untold story of a moment when humanity transcended the boundaries set by hate and fear. A tale of sacrifice between people whom society taught to be enemies, but whose shared humanity created an unbreakable bond. This story contains revelations about how native peoples and former slaves sometimes found common ground in ways that threatened the very system designed to keep them apart, which is precisely why these stories were deliberately erased from our textbooks. Stay with me until the very end. The final chapter reveals a historical truth so powerful it will transform how you understand American frontier relations forever. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now to join the Black Rancher community, where we uncover the untold stories of those who shaped our nation against impossible odds. Share this video to help these forgotten heroes reclaim their rightful place in history. Now, prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of the American West that nobody wanted you to see. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Black Rancher, the channel dedicated to uncovering the erased histories of black heroes from America's frontier. Hit that subscribe button now and ring that notification bell so you never miss these powerful stories that deserve to be told. Now let's ride into Chapter 1 of a tale that will change how you see the American West forever. Arizona Territory, July 1879. The sun hung mercilessly in a cloudless sky, baking the Arizona landscape to a golden crisp. Solomon Hayes wiped sweat from his brow with a kerchief that had once been red but had faded to the same dusty color as everything else on his small ranch. At 45, his face was weathered like tanned leather, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much suffering and joy in equal measure. Freedom had come late for Solomon. 16 years since emancipation, and only 10 since he'd managed to make his way west, with nothing but determination and skills learned from a lifetime handling horses on a Virginia plantation. The 20 acres he now called Perseverance Ranch represented everything he had in the world. His small herd of 15 horses, down from 22 the previous year, grazed on the sparse vegetation. The drought had been relentless, stretching now into its second year. The creek that bisected his property had dried to a trickle, barely enough to sustain his animals, let alone allow him to expand his breeding program. "Come on, Thunder," Solomon said, patting the neck of his prized stallion, a magnificent black Andalusian he'd acquired 3 years earlier in a stroke of impossible luck. "Let's check the north fence line again." Thunder was worth more than everything else Solomon owned combined. The stallion's bloodline was impeccable, his conformation flawless. Several larger ranchers had offered substantial sums for him, but Solomon had refused. Thunder was the future of Perseverance Ranch, the cornerstone of his dream to build something that would outlast him. As they rode along the rocky ridge that marked his northern boundary, Solomon spotted a dust cloud in the distance. Riders moving fast and heading in his direction, his hand instinctively moved to the Winchester rifle in his saddle holster. Out here, visitors rarely brought good news. He guided Thunder behind a large outcropping of rock, giving him a protected position, with a clear view of the approaching riders. Through his brass spyglass, he counted 5 figures, no, 7, moving with purpose across the scrubland. Apache. Solomon's grip tightened on his rifle. Relations between settlers and the Apache had deteriorated rapidly over the past year. The U.S. Cavalry had been ruthlessly driving them from their traditional territories, forcing many bands to raid settlements for food and supplies simply to survive. He had nothing against the Apache. He understood all too well what it meant to be hunted and displaced, but he couldn't afford to lose any more of his horses, not if he wanted to survive another year. As the riders drew closer, Solomon noted something unusual. They weren't riding in a typical raiding formation. Instead, they seemed to be struggling, two of the horses carrying double with one rider slumped against another. Were they wounded, fleeing from something? Solomon hesitated, then made a decision that would alter the course of many lives. Instead of remaining hidden, he guided Thunder out from behind the rocks and into plain sight, rifle across his lap, but not aimed. The lead Apache rider spotted him immediately, raising a hand to halt the others. For a long moment, they stared across the 100 yards separating them, neither side moving. Then, unexpectedly, two figures detached from the group. Women, Solomon realized with surprise. Young women, perhaps in their early 20s, riding double on a horse that looked like it could barely support their weight. They approached slowly, hands visible, while the others remained at a distance. Solomon kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. Apache women rarely dealt with outsiders, especially not alone. They stopped 20 paces from him. The taller of the two spoke, her English halting but clear enough. "Please," she said, her voice betraying exhaustion and something else, desperation. "We need help. Our people are dying." The taller Apache woman's dark eyes held Solomon's gaze without flinching. Her face was streaked with dust, her black hair pulled back in a practical braid. The woman behind her appeared younger, perhaps her sister, with a similar strong-featured face currently tight with worry. "I'm Nijoni," the taller woman said, placing a hand on her chest. "This is my sister, Nasha." She gestured to the group waiting in the distance. "Our band, 28 people. 8 are children, 3 are elders." Solomon remained silent, assessing. He'd heard that the military had been burning Apache fields and food stores, driving them from water sources, making survival nearly impossible. A deliberate campaign of starvation. "Why come to me?" Solomon finally asked. "There are bigger ranches, white ranches." Nijoni's expression hardened. "We tried. They shot at us, said they'd get rewards for Apache scalps." Solomon winced internally. He'd heard those rumors too. "Our father is Chetan," Nijoni continued, studying Solomon's face for recognition. The name meant nothing to him, and he shook his head. 5 summers ago," she explained. "Cavalry attacked our camp. You were there. You stopped a soldier from killing our father. You gave him water." Solomon's mind raced back. There had been an incident, a cavalry unit gone rogue, attacking a peaceful Apache camp. He'd been delivering horses to Fort Bowie and had stumbled upon the massacre. He had intervened, but had never known the name of the man he'd helped. "That was your father?" he asked softly. Nijoni nodded. "He told us, if trouble comes, find the Black Horseman. He has honor." Solomon shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable with both the praise and the weight of expectation it carried. Nasha spoke for the first time, her voice crackling with emotion. "Please, sir, our people are dying. The soldiers burned our food, poisoned our water. We have not eaten in 4 days." "The children," her voice broke. Solomon looked past them to the waiting band. Even from this distance, he could see how thin they were, how they slumped in their saddles. "What exactly are you asking for?" he questioned, though he already knew the answer. "Food," Nijoni replied. "Medicine for the sick, and—" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "Horses, to reach our cousins in the mountains to the north. We cannot walk so far, not with the children and elders." Solomon let out a slow breath. What they were asking would cripple him financially. His entire future rested on those horses. "The army is looking for you?" Both women nodded grimly. "If they find out I helped you—" "They will not," Nijoni interrupted. "We know how to travel without being seen, and we will never speak your name." Solomon gazed out at his small herd grazing in the distance. Every horse represented years of work, sacrifice, and planning. Thunder alone could set him up for years if he sold him. "Wait here," he finally said, turning Thunder back toward his cabin. As he rode away, he heard Nasha whisper something to her sister in Apache. He didn't understand the words, but the tone of fading hope was unmistakable. At his cabin, Solomon moved quickly. He filled 2 large saddlebags with cornmeal, dried beans, jerky, coffee, and sugar, nearly all his stored provisions. He added his medical supplies, bandages, alcohol, laudanum and yarrow for fever. His winter would be lean, but he could hunt. These people had nothing. As he worked, Solomon wrestled with the larger decision. The horses, his future, everything he'd worked for since freedom. He thought about the children Nasha had mentioned. He thought about what it meant to be hunted, to be considered less than human. He knew that feeling intimately. When he returned to where the sisters waited, his decision was made. "I have food and medicine," he announced, handing over the heavy saddlebags, "and I can give you 5 horses." Relief flooded Nijoni's face, but Nasha looked troubled. "5 horses cannot carry 28 people," she said softly. "Not with your supplies as well," Solomon agreed. "But it's all I can spare." The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We understand," Nijoni said finally, though disappointment shadowed her eyes. "We are grateful." Solomon watched as they calculated, likely figuring who would ride and who would walk, who was strong enough to make such a journey on foot through hostile territory. He sighed heavily, knowing what he had to do, even as everything in him rebelled against it. "There is one more horse," he said reluctantly. "My stallion, Thunder. He's strong enough to carry 2 adults or several children for many miles without tiring." Both women's eyes widened. "But he is your prized horse," Nasha objected. "We have seen how you look at him." "He is," Solomon agreed, patting Thunder's gleaming neck. "And he's worth more than all my other horses combined." Nijoni studied him intently. "Why would you give us your most valuable possession?" Solomon met her gaze steadily. "Because I know what it's like to be property. To have your worth measured in dollars, to be hunted." He paused. "No child deserves that fate." For the first time, Nijoni's composure cracked, her eyes brightening with unshed tears. She spoke rapid Apache to her sister, who nodded solemnly. "Our people will never forget this," Nijoni said, switching back to English. "This debt will be honored." Solomon shook his head. "There is no debt, just humans helping humans." As they prepared to leave with the supplies and horses, including Thunder, Solomon felt a hollow space opening in his chest. The stallion had been more than an investment. He'd been a companion through lonely years. Nasha approached him one last time, pressing something into his hand. A small pouch made of deer hide decorated with intricate beadwork. "Medicine bundle," she explained, "for protection and good fortune." Before Solomon could respond, she had stepped back and mounted one of his horses. "May the Creator watch over you, Solomon Hayes," Nijoni called as they prepared to ride back to their waiting band. "And you," he replied, already wondering how he would rebuild from this setback. He watched them go, Thunder's black coat gleaming in the sunlight, until they disappeared into the distance. Then he turned and walked back to his now empty corral, the weight of solitude settling around his shoulders once more. You're watching The Black Rancher, uncovering the untold stories of America's frontier. If you're moved by Solomon's sacrifice, hit that subscribe button and share this video. There's much more to this story, and the most powerful moments are still to come. 2 months passed. The drought intensified, turning the landscape around Perseverance Ranch into a wasteland of cracked earth and withered vegetation. Without his horses, Solomon had little to occupy his time beyond basic survival. He hunted what game remained, traded occasional labor at neighboring ranches for supplies, and tried not to think about Thunder or the uncertain future that stretched before him. Word had spread about a band of Apache that had mysteriously disappeared into the northern mountains, evading the cavalry units sent to capture them. No one connected Solomon to their escape, but the incident had heightened tensions in the territory. Rumors of increased Apache raiding parties had white settlers on edge, their suspicion falling on anyone who wasn't one of them, especially a solitary black rancher who kept to himself. On a scorching September afternoon, Solomon sat on his porch, repairing a worn saddle he no longer had a horse to place it on. The irony wasn't lost on him. In the distance, a dust cloud approached along the eastern trail, 2 riders moving at a steady pace. Solomon reached for his rifle, keeping it across his lap as the visitors drew closer. He recognized the lead rider immediately, Captain James Hargrove of the US. Cavalry, a man with a reputation for cruelty toward both native peoples and anyone with skin darker than his own. The second rider was one of his sergeants, a hulking man whose name Solomon couldn't recall. They reined in their horses in front of his cabin. Neither dismounted, a deliberate show of superiority. "Hayes," Captain Hargrove acknowledged curtly, not bothering with the courtesy of Mr. that he would have extended to any white man. "Captain," Solomon replied neutrally. "What brings you to my property?" Hargrove's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the empty corral. "Where are your horses, Hayes? Last time I passed this way, you had quite a collection." "Sold them," Solomon answered, keeping his face impassive. "Drought's been hard. Couldn't feed them." "Sold them," Hargrove repeated skeptically. "All of them, including that fine black stallion you were so proud of." "All of them. Strange. No one in the territory recalls purchasing horses from you recently." Hargrove leaned forward in his saddle. "Especially strange considering a band of Apache renegades somehow acquired fresh mounts around the same time your horses disappeared." Solomon felt a chill despite the heat. "Don't know anything about that. Sold mine to a buyer from California. Didn't announce it to the whole territory." The sergeant spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You're lying, boy." Solomon's jaw tightened at the intentional insult, but he kept his tone even. "I don't answer to you, Sergeant, and I don't appreciate being called a liar on my own land." "Your land?" Hargrove laughed coldly. "Let's be clear, Hayes. You're only here because the government, in its misguided charity, decided former slaves should have rights they don't deserve. One word from me about you aiding hostiles, and this property will have a new owner before the month is out." Solomon remained silent, knowing any response would only provoke them further. Hargrove's expression turned calculating. "There's a reward, you know, for information leading to the capture of that particular Apache band. Their leader, Chetan, has been a thorn in the Army's side for years." "I wish you luck finding them," Solomon replied evenly. "Oh, we will." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And when we do, we'll question them thoroughly about how they acquired their horses." "If I discover you've aided enemies of the United States government, Hayes, I'll personally see you hang." With that threat hanging in the air, Hargrove wheeled his horse around and rode away, his sergeant following close behind. Solomon watched them go, his hand tight around his rifle. He had no doubt Hargrove meant every word. The captain was known for holding grudges and had the authority to act on them with impunity, especially against a man like Solomon. That night, sleep eluded him. He sat by his window, rifle nearby, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of trouble. Hargrove wasn't the type to let suspicion rest. He would be back, perhaps with more men. Solomon considered his options. He could sell the ranch and move on. Many black homesteaders did exactly that when threats mounted. But where would he go? This land, harsh as it was, had become his home, his freedom. He had already sacrificed his horses. He wasn't prepared to sacrifice his independence as well. As dawn broke, Solomon came to a decision. He would stay and face whatever came. He had survived slavery, war, and the dangerous journey west. He would survive this too, somehow. 3 days later, Solomon awoke to an unusual sound. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, approaching fast. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, expecting to see Hargrove returning with a larger force. Instead, he saw a sight that momentarily stopped his breath. A group of mounted Apache warriors, at least 15 strong, riding openly toward his cabin. At their head was a tall, imposing man whose bearing marked him as their leader. Solomon stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand, but pointed downward. The Apache riders halted 30 yards from his cabin. The leader raised his hand in greeting, then dismounted. As he approached alone, Solomon recognized something familiar in his features, the same strong nose and cheekbones as Nijoni and Nasha. "You are Solomon Hayes," the man said in heavily accented but clear English. "I am Chetan." He touched his chest. "You saved my life once, then you saved my people again by giving your horses." Solomon nodded cautiously. "Your daughters found me." "My daughters speak highly of you." Chetan glanced back at his warriors. "My people say you have the heart of an Apache trapped in a black man's body." Despite the tension of the situation, Solomon smiled slightly at this. "I'm just a man trying to live free, same as you." Chetan's expression turned serious. "The bluecoats search for us still. They also watch you. My scouts have seen them." Solomon wasn't surprised. "Their captain threatened me, said he'd see me hang if he found proof I helped you." Chetan nodded gravely. "This is why we have come, to repay our debt." "There is no debt," Solomon insisted, echoing what he'd told Nijoni. "There is," Chetan contradicted firmly. "And Apache honor demands it be paid." He gestured behind him. For the first time, Solomon noticed something that made his heart leap. Thunder, his black stallion, looking healthy and strong, standing among the Apache horses. "You're returning him?" Solomon asked, disbelieving. "He is yours," Chetan confirmed, "but we bring more than just one horse." At a signal from their leader, several warriors moved forward, leading a string of horses, at least 20, Solomon counted in amazement. Some were army mounts, recognizable by their brands. Others were clearly wild horses, recently broken. "We cannot stay here," Chetan continued. "The mountains call to us. But these horses are yours. Payment for your generosity. Payment for your risk." Solomon was speechless. The gift before him represented wealth beyond what he had possessed before, enough to rebuild his ranch into something truly substantial. "I can't accept," he began. "You can. You will." Chetan's tone brooked no argument. "My daughter said you understand honor. Prove them right." Solomon looked from the horses to Chetan and back again. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you. This is more than generous." Chetan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The blue coats will return. When they see these horses, they will ask questions." "Let them," Solomon replied with newfound confidence. "These are army mounts mixed with mustangs. I'll say I found them wandering after a band of Apache raiders were driven off by settlers." "No one can prove otherwise." A rare smile crossed Chetan's face. "You think like Apache." He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something that glinted in the morning light, a cavalry officer's insignia. "Captain Hargrove's patrol met with misfortune 3 days ago," Chetan said carefully, handing the insignia to Solomon. "He will not trouble you again." Solomon accepted the piece of metal, understanding its significance, but choosing not to ask for details. "Some things were better left unspoken. The spirits of our ancestors watch over you, Solomon Hayes," Chetan said, extending his hand in the white man's custom of sealing an agreement. Solomon grasped it firmly. "And may your people find peace in the mountains." As the Apache prepared to depart, Nijoni and Nasha emerged from among the warriors. They approached Solomon, each carrying something. Nijoni presented him with a finely crafted Apache blanket. "For cold nights," she explained. Nasha handed him a leather-bound bundle. "Seeds," she said, "plants that grow even in dry times. My grandmother taught me." Solomon accepted both gifts with genuine gratitude. "I'll think of your people whenever I use them." With final nods of respect, the sisters rejoined their band. Chetan raised his hand in farewell, then mounted his horse. Within moments, the entire group had ridden away, quickly disappearing into the landscape they knew so intimately. Solomon stood among his new herd, thunder nuzzling his shoulder in recognition. For the first time in months, he felt hope blooming like a rare desert flower after rain. By spring of 1880, Perseverance Ranch was transformed. The winter had brought unexpected rains, breaking the drought's hold on the territory. The creek flowed strong again, nourishing pastures that had begun to recover their verdant color. Solomon's expanded herd, now 32 horses, grazed contentedly on the rejuvenated grassland. With the proceeds from selling some of his gift horses, Solomon had purchased adjacent land, expanding his holdings to 80 acres. He'd hired 2 hands to help with the growing operation, a young Mexican vaquero named Miguel, who had an almost magical way with horses, and Joshua, a fellow freedman who had headed west, seeking the same independence that had drawn Solomon years earlier. Word had spread about the quality of Solomon's stock. His expertise in horse breeding, combined with the outstanding bloodlines of Thunder and several of the mares, had produced foals that caught the attention of buyers from as far away as California and Colorado. The story he'd concocted about finding army horses after an Apache raid had been accepted without much question. Captain Hargrove and his patrol had indeed disappeared while pursuing hostile Indians in the mountains, and the military seemed content to close the matter rather than investigate too deeply, a failure they preferred not to highlight. On a bright April morning, Solomon sat on his new porch, drinking coffee as he watched Miguel working with a spirited 2-year-old colt. The sound of approaching riders drew his attention to the road. 3 men on horseback approached, a white man in an expensive suit flanked by 2 Mexican vaqueros. Solomon recognized the center rider immediately, Edward Blackwood, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. His holdings stretched across thousands of acres to the south, and his political connections in Washington were said to be substantial. Solomon had never dealt with him directly, but knew his reputation as a hard but generally fair businessman. "Mr. Hayes," Blackwood called as they drew near, using the courtesy title that many white men still refuse to grant. "I hope you don't mind my unannounced visit." Solomon set down his coffee cup. "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood. What brings you to Perseverance Ranch?" Blackwood dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. "Your reputation, sir. I've heard remarkable things about your breeding program, particularly that Andalusian stallion of yours." Solomon couldn't hide his surprise at this direct acknowledgement of his success from such an influential figure. "Thunder has produced some fine offspring," he agreed modestly. "More than fine, from what I've heard," Blackwood replied, glancing appreciatively at the horses visible in the nearest pasture. "I've come to propose a business arrangement." He explained that he was expanding into horse breeding alongside his cattle operation and needed quality stock to begin. Rather than competing with Solomon, he was proposing a partnership, access to Thunder's bloodline in exchange for capital investment that would allow Solomon to expand his facilities and acquire additional broodmares. As they discussed details, walking the property, Solomon found himself both cautious and intrigued. Such partnerships between white and black business owners were virtually unheard of in the territory. "Why me?" he finally asked directly. "There must be other breeders you could work with. White breeders." Blackwood considered the question seriously. "Mr. Hayes, I've built my fortune by recognizing value where others see only color or creed. Your methods produce results that speak for themselves." He paused. "Additionally, I find that men who have overcome adversity often possess a work ethic and integrity that those born to privilege frequently lack." Before Solomon could respond, movement on the northern ridge caught his attention. A small group of riders appeared, making their way slowly down toward the ranch house. As they drew closer, Solomon recognized them with a jolt of surprise. Apache, but not warriors this time. Women and children, perhaps 10 in total, led by a familiar figure, Nasha. Blackwood tensed beside him. "Apache," he said quietly, his hand moving toward his sidearm. "Friends," Solomon corrected firmly. "They're welcome on my land." He strode forward to meet the group, leaving a bemused Blackwood behind. Nasha dismounted when she reached him, her face breaking into a rare smile. "Solomon Hayes," she greeted him. "Your ranch prospers. This brings joy to my heart." "Nasha," he replied warmly, "I didn't expect to see you again. Is your family well?" "They are." She gestured to the women and children behind her. "We come to trade." It was then that Solomon noticed the bundles on their horses, beautifully tanned hides, woven baskets, beaded leather goods. "We were told there is a trading post in the settlement nearby," Nasha explained. "But the white men there—" She trailed off, but her expression conveyed the hostility they had likely encountered. "You're welcome to trade here," Solomon assured her. "I can help arrange fair exchanges for your goods." Blackwood had approached during this conversation, his initial wariness giving way to curiosity. "Your craftsmanship is exceptional," he commented, examining an intricately beaded pouch one of the women held. Nasha regarded him suspiciously. "This is Mr. Blackwood," Solomon introduced, "a business associate." Understanding Solomon's subtle message that this man was to be treated as an ally, Nasha inclined her head slightly. "Such items would fetch premium prices in Tucson or even San Francisco." Blackwood observed thoughtfully. Then, to Solomon's surprise, he addressed Nasha directly. "Madam, if you and your people are interested in a regular trading arrangement, I have connections that could ensure your work reaches markets where it would be properly valued." Solomon watched as Nasha processed this unexpected offer, her initial suspicion gradually shifting to cautious interest. "We would consider this," she said finally. As the discussion continued, Solomon felt a profound sense of wonder at the scene unfolding before him. Apache, a wealthy white rancher, his Mexican vaqueros, and a former slave, all engaged in civil commerce on land he owned. Later, after arrangements had been made for both the horse-breeding partnership and a potential trading relationship with Nasha's band, Solomon walked with her to the ridge where they could speak privately. "Your father?" he asked. "Chetan?" "He leads our people in the mountains," she replied. "Safe for now. The soldiers search less often these days." "And Nijoni?" "Married to a warrior from our cousin band." A small smile. "She has a son now." Solomon nodded, pleased at this news of life continuing despite all attempts to extinguish it. "You have created something important here," Nasha observed, gesturing to the ranch below, "a place where different peoples can meet in peace." Solomon hadn't thought of it that way, but he realized she was right. Intentionally or not, he had established a small island of cooperation in a sea of conflict. "Perhaps this is why the spirits guided us to you," Nasha continued, "not just for horses, but for this." She gestured to where Blackwood was still examining the Apache crafts, conversing respectfully with the women through one of his vaqueros who spoke their language. "One man cannot change the whole world," Solomon said thoughtfully, "but maybe he can change his small corner of it." Nasha touched the medicine bundle that still hung at Solomon's waist, the one she had given him months ago. "Many drops of water can become a river," she said simply. As the Apache prepared to depart with promises to return in one moon for trading, Nasha presented Solomon with a final gift, a small carving of a horse, masterfully executed in dark wood. "For the man who gave his last horse," she said, "but found a herd in return." Arizona Territory, 1898. The elegant sign at the entrance read, "Hayes and Blackwood Horse Enterprises," but locals still called it Perseverance Ranch. Now spanning 500 acres, it had become one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the Southwest. Solomon Hayes, his hair now completely gray at 64, sat on the wide porch of the large ranch house, watching his grandchildren playing in the yard. His daughter Rebecca had married Miguel's son, and their 3 children represented the future Solomon had once barely dared to imagine. Beside him sat Edward Blackwood, now in his 70s, retired but still a regular visitor to the ranch. Their business partnership had evolved into a genuine friendship over the years, weathering economic downturns, political changes, and social disapproval from those who couldn't accept their association. "Mail's here," called Joshua, now the ranch foreman, handing Solomon several envelopes. One caught his attention immediately. The return address showed it was from the Chiricahua Apache Reservation in New Mexico Territory. He opened it carefully. Inside was a newspaper clipping about the growing market for authentic Native American crafts, with a particular mention of the cooperative trading network established by Nasha Hayes. Solomon smiled at the name. Though they had never married, Nasha had taken his surname years ago when they established the Apache Trading Cooperative together. Their relationship had defied easy categorization, business partners certainly, but also family of a kind forged through mutual respect and shared purpose. The note accompanying the clipping was brief, written in Nasha's now fluent English. "The river continues to grow. 20 families now support themselves through the cooperative. Your grandchildren and our future generations will inherit a different world than the one we were born into. N." "Good news?" Blackwood inquired. "The best kind," Solomon replied, handing him the clipping. As Blackwood read it, Solomon's gaze drifted to the corral, where Thunder's grandson, nearly identical to his illustrious ancestor, pranced with the same proud bearing. Beyond him, the mountains rose in the distance, the same mountains where Chetan's people had found refuge decades earlier. The world had changed dramatically since those desperate days. The Apache Wars had ended. Geronimo had surrendered. Reservations, though deeply problematic, had replaced outright extermination as government policy. Here in the Southwest, the rigid racial hierarchies of the East had been somewhat tempered by the practical necessities of frontier life and the influence of Mexican culture. Yet true equality remained elusive. Each small victory had required countless sacrifices and unceasing effort. The trading cooperative had faced boycotts and threats. The horse breeding partnership had lost customers who refused to do business with a mixed-race enterprise. There had been night riders, attempted arson, lawsuits designed to bankrupt them. But they had persevered. The quality of their horses had eventually overcome prejudice. The unique crafts from the cooperative had found appreciative markets in New York, San Francisco, even Europe. Most importantly, they had created a model that others had begun to emulate. Businesses based on mutual respect and shared prosperity rather than exploitation. "You know," Blackwood mused, handing back the clipping, "when I proposed our partnership almost 20 years ago, I thought it was simply a good business decision. I never imagined we'd help create a blueprint for the future." Solomon nodded thoughtfully. "One horse," he said softly. "It all began with one horse." "Pardon?" "Nothing," Solomon smiled, "just remembering how close we came to never meeting at all." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Perseverance Ranch, Solomon reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. A desperate plea from two Apache sisters, a sacrifice he couldn't afford to make, a debt repaid with honor, small choices that had gradually altered the course of many lives. In a world that had tried to teach them they were enemies, they had chosen a different path, not an easy one, not a perfect one, but one that had allowed them to retain their humanity in inhumane times and to build something that might outlast them all. Solomon watched as his oldest grandson approached the corral, offering an apple to Thunder's descendant with the confident ease of a born horseman. The boy's mixed heritage was visible in his features, a living bridge between worlds that many still tried to keep separate. "Grandpa," the boy called excitedly, "look how he takes it so gentle." Solomon smiled with pride. "That's right, Isaiah. A good horseman builds trust, not fear." As twilight deepened into dusk, lanterns were lit around the ranch house, casting a warm glow that pushed back the gathering darkness. From the direction of the bunkhouse came the sound of a guitar and voices raised in song, a mixture of English, Spanish, and Apache lyrics that had become the unofficial anthem of Perseverance Ranch. "I should head back," Blackwood said, rising slowly from his chair. "These old bones don't take well to night riding anymore." "Stay," Solomon offered. "Your room is always ready." The room was actually a small but comfortable cabin, built specifically for Blackwood's frequent visits, a concession to the social conventions that still frowned on white and black families sharing living quarters, even after all these years of partnership. "I believe I will," Blackwood agreed, settling back into his chair. "Sarah has the grandchildren this week anyway." His wife of 40 years understood the importance of these visits, though she rarely came herself. As the evening progressed, more visitors arrived, a regular occurrence on the first Friday of each month. The Apache trading delegation, now led by Nasha's niece, brought their latest crafts. Several Mexican families from the nearby settlement came bearing dishes for the communal meal. Two black homesteaders who had settled in the valley under Solomon's guidance arrived with their children. What had begun as a simple trading arrangement had evolved into something more significant, a monthly gathering where people from different backgrounds broke bread together, shared news, resolved conflicts, and celebrated important events. Tonight was special. As the large outdoor table was set with an abundance of food, Solomon rose to address the assembled group. "Friends," he began, his deep voice carrying easily across the yard. 20 years ago, most of us couldn't have imagined sitting together like this. Some of us were enemies, others were strangers. All of us were taught that our differences mattered more than our common humanity. Heads nodded around the table. Tonight, we celebrate not just another month of successful trading, but something more precious, the graduation of the first student from our ranch school. All eyes turned to a young Apache woman, perhaps 17, who sat beside Nasha. She lowered her gaze modestly, though pride was evident in her posture. Mary Thunderhorse, Solomon continued, using the English name she had chosen for herself, has completed all her studies with Mrs. Caldwell and has been accepted to the Teachers College in Santa Fe. She will be the first from our community to receive higher education. A cheer went up from the gathered families. The small school at Perseverance Ranch had begun 5 years earlier, when Solomon had converted an unused storage building and hired a widow from Tucson, a former schoolteacher who didn't share the prevalent prejudices of the day, to provide education for the children of his workers and trading partners. Many had been skeptical, especially about educating native children, whom the government preferred to remove to distant boarding schools where their language and culture would be systematically erased. But Solomon and Nasha had been adamant. Their community would educate its own, preserving cultural identity while providing the tools needed to navigate the changing world. Mary rose, her voice clear and confident as she thanked her teachers, her family, and the community that had supported her. "I will return," she promised. "What I learn I will bring back to teach others." As the celebration continued into the night, Solomon found himself standing at the edge of the gathering with Nasha, both of them watching the mingled community with quiet satisfaction. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked her. "That day when you and Nijoni came asking for help?" "No," she admitted. "That day, I saw only the next step needed for survival." She turned to look at him directly. "And you? When you gave your last horse?" Solomon shook his head. "I thought I was sacrificing my future. Instead," he gestured to the thriving ranch, the gathered families. "Instead, I found it." Nasha nodded, understanding perfectly. "The small seed grows into the great tree." Later, after most guests had departed and the ranch had quieted, Solomon sat alone by the dying embers of the cook fire. From his pocket, he withdrew the small wooden horse carving Nasha had given him nearly 20 years earlier. Its surface was smooth from years of handling, a tangible reminder of the moment that had changed everything. He thought about the young people growing up at Perseverance Ranch, his grandchildren, Nasha's nieces and nephews, the children of his workers. They were being raised in a community that, while far from perfect, demonstrated daily that cooperation was possible, that boundaries could be crossed, that humanity could transcend the artificial divisions others tried to impose. Would they carry these lessons forward? Would they remember the stories of how it all began? Would they understand that the world they inherited had been paid for with sacrifice, courage, and countless small acts of defiance against hatred? Solomon placed another log on the fire, watching as the flames found new life in the darkness. Like hope, he thought, like legacy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The trading cooperative was expanding to include Navajo artisans from the north. The horse breeding operation was negotiating contracts with buyers from as far away as Kentucky. The school needed additional space and teachers for its growing student body. But tonight, under a sky brilliant with stars, Solomon Hayes, former slave, horse breeder, community builder, allowed himself to feel the simple satisfaction of a journey well traveled, one that had begun with two desperate sisters and a plea he could not refuse. "Please, sir, our people are dying," they had said. And in choosing compassion over self-interest that day, he had helped ensure that not only would their people live, but that something new and hopeful could be born from the ashes of conflict and prejudice. It wasn't the end of struggle. It wasn't perfect justice or complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a seed, a legacy that would continue to grow long after he was gone. And for tonight, that was enough. If this story moved you, please take a moment right now to support the Black Rancher channel by subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and sharing this video with friends and family who need to hear these untold stories of America's diverse frontier. Your support helps us continue to uncover and share the powerful narratives of Black, Native American, and other marginalized heroes whose contributions shaped our nation but were erased from traditional history books. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Solomon's journey and what other untold stories from the West you'd like to see featured on this channel. Remember, when we uncover these hidden histories, we don't just learn about the past, we open new possibilities for understanding each other in the present. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, this is The Black Rancher, bringing America's forgotten frontier stories back to light, one powerful tale at a time.